So firstly, welcome to TJO's series, the OR and Beyond. For everybody who signed up, you probably already know, but in case you don't, the purpose of this webinar series and the course that we're going to run throughout this year is really to engage fellows, residents, and early in practice surgeons to give them an introduction into, yes, techniques and surgery that are going on in today's practice, but also what does it mean to be in the business of orthopedics and how might that look? And there's obviously a lot of spectrum of conversation there and a lot of different areas that we're going to cover. Everything from today's topic of private practice versus teaching institutions to coding, negotiation when you're going into a new role, and everything in between that. And so I think as we take this journey over the course of the next sort of 11 months ahead, I think we're going to find a lot of great content for our fellows, residents, and early in practice surgeons. So thank you for joining us. And I look forward to kind of being a part of that journey with you all and learning along the way. So today, as I mentioned, our topic is really private practice versus teaching institution. How do you make that decision and why go to one versus the other? And as we'll probably learn throughout this conversation, it's not black and white. There is no clear delineation anymore between one side or the other. It's becoming very much a gray spectrum of options. And I think that's going to be a fascinating part of what we're going to learn about tonight. We're fortunate to have three stellar individuals as our faculty for our first episode. And so I'm pleased and proud to be able to present them to you all. So first, we have Dr. Bernstein, who is, had extensive training in navigation, robotics, and patient-specific technology. And so I think there she's going to bring a different perspective of how that influences her decisions for various roles. She's specialized in partial knee replacements, revision, total hips, and hip fractures. And so basically did her undergrad at Cornell University and medical school at University of Connecticut. Her residency completed at the University of Pennsylvania. And she did a specialized knee and hip replacement fellowship at New York University, the Insel Scott Kelly Institute in New York City. So I'm proud and pleased to be able to have her with us tonight. Dr. Bradbury. Dr. Bradbury attended college at Washington and Lee University. He obtained his medical degree from the Medical College of Georgia. He decided to specialize his career exclusively on hip and knee replacement surgery and completed a residency at Vanderbilt University. And then his fellowship in hip and knee replacement at the highly selective Ortho Carolina Hip and Knee Center in Charlotte. So, we're pleased to have Dr. Bradbury here. He's performed over 4,000 hip cases and over 7,500 hip and knee replacement procedures. So I think we've got an extensive amount of experience there. And then lastly, we have Dr. Hofmann, and, proud to have Dr. Hofmann on this call. He is a renowned surgeon who has had influence on this industry as a whole, served for over 30 years at the University of Utah, served as the chief of orthopedics at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Salt Lake City for 29 years, holds multiple patents on orthopedic devices, and is a surgeon designer for hip and knee prosthesis systems. But he's not only designed products, he's been a part of the development of surgical techniques in orthopedics today. So I think there is so much that we can learn from these individuals that they bring to the table as a spectrum of experience. And I'm really excited for what this conversation holds. So I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Bernstein, who's going to open and kind of, each of them are going to tell their story. How did they get to where they got to? What were the decisions that were a part of that process? And then we'll go from there with this conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll start. So great to meet you all virtually, and thanks so much to TJO for hosting. This is really and also thank you guys for all logging on, because this is something that technology is really enabling us to connect early and to really get access to people that you might not get to talk to before. So really ask us all your questions. Nothing is dumb. It's really important just to get the advice that you need to start out. So for me, I'm early in practice. I've been in practice for a few years now, And I'm already on my second job, which is a theme when you start to talk to young orthopedic surgeons. It's very, very common to change practices early these days. So I started out in my training, not necessarily knowing I wanted to go into arthroplasty, deciding that kind of the end of my second year and really becoming passionate about the field, and ended up matching at NYU for my fellowship. And at the time, I did not think I was going to be an academic surgeon. I was someone who I was a chemistry major in undergrad. I was a big science nerd. I liked bench research. Went to residency where I trained. It was just kind of not a possible thing to keep doing. It was really hard to do basic science research and have time to do residency and work, 80 hours. And so I ended up, I did some projects, but it was a very, very hard place to do research and have your research supported. And that was just a big turnoff for me. Every research project I did, I spent hours and hours doing chart reviews or radiology measurements. And it was just I was not inspired by research, let's put it that way. I went to fellowship and it went kind of the other direction. I was actually inspired to do research. And I think a lot of that was the academic place that I was at had a very clear infrastructure for research. It was very easy if you had an idea to present it to the research team. They had research fellows that were medical students or people between years who were their full-time job for those couple of years was to do research. They had a research coordinator. They had IRBs already in place for retrospective studies. So it was a very easy place to have your ideas be supported without having to do all of the legwork. And for me, I was like, wow, I really like idea generating. I really like the process of thinking about research projects, writing, doing the part of research that wasn't like slaving over chart reviews for hours and hours and hours and like begging someone to help you with an IRB, which anyone who's doing research in most medical schools and residencies kind of know what I'm talking about. It can be miserable. It's a turnoff to research. So I started to think, I really like research. I really like teaching, working with the residents as a fellow, and maybe an academic career is something that I want. I kind of really changed my mind. So when I started the process, and we can talk more about, choosing jobs or whatever, but when I started the process, I really was looking at both academic and private practice jobs. I was applying to both, kind of seeing like what I thought was going to be a good fit for me. And I was more excited about the academic jobs for sure at the time. And I also looked at hospital employed jobs, which we should talk about too. But it ended up that the academic job that I initially took, it was a very straight academic job, research, teaching expected, and expected obviously also to operate. I was really excited about. I was like, here, I'm going to be able to do everything. It was a program that I considered that was making big changes to improve their research. And I was kind of excited about the potential and the possibility. And on the other hand, I always thought I would go into private practice because I wanted to be my own boss, right? Like I knew that I was someone who wanted to make decisions, who wanted to be able to run a practice efficiently. I was always someone that was, if things were going slow, that was going to drive me crazy. If things were inefficient, that was going to drive me crazy. And I kind of in my mind forgot those things, I think, about myself when I took my first job. And those things that I knew were going to bother me did bother me. It was I found to be an inefficient place to do cases. I found for me, my research wasn't supported in the same way it had been in my fellowship, which obviously you can't ask something to come from scratch, but there has to be some institutional support. And I just felt, more frustrated than not by a lot of other things, and just started to talk to other people about, what should I do? Do I stick it out and see if things get better? And I'm lucky to have a lot of really strong mentors that, helped advise me. And I ended up kind of talking with some of my, some friends that were in the area where I already lived, who were hiring for a private practice that was somewhat affiliated with my academic institution, that had a really positive culture, that had a lot of control over the ortho that was going in the private hospitals. And it ended up just being the right opportunity for me. And so about four months ago now, so pretty new, I switched from my really pure academic job to a really pure private practice job, which I probably went as far as you could go on the spectrum of different jobs. And I will tell you, there is no perfect job. There's nothing's going to be perfect. And a lot of it for me was kind of understanding the things about myself that made me happy with my day. So having control over who was going to be on my team. For me, like patient facing is very important. And so I wanted to be able to choose who's the one who's calling back my patients. Can I make sure that they're calling them back the same day within hours versus when I was at an academic center, it was not really like that. You never knew what kind of roundabout, circuitous way they were going to try and get to you. You may or may not get that message. I wanted to make sure that if things weren't running efficiently, that I would have some say in how to make things function better. I wanted to work, I wanted to be a higher clinical volume than I felt like I was able to do at an academic institution. And again, not all academic institutions are the same. But for me, I think those things were things I knew I wanted in a job always, but I kind of had the hopes of being able to find everything I liked in one job. And then, now I'm trying to recreate some of the things that I'm missing from my current job here. So like trying to establish a research program, things like that, that I know are more on me than it is on the institution. But I think that the pros I have in culture, in efficiency, in control for me was the big change. So, I mean, my takeaways are there's really nothing wrong with changing your job early. So many people do it. We can talk more, but for me, like location was one of the most important things. And I'm of the mindset that if you have a place you really want to live, then even if you don't have the perfect job there, at least you get yourself in that area. And then you meet people, you talk to people, you network, you do a good job in that area. People are going to know that you did a good job. And you'll also know like the reputation of the group's better. The group that I'm at now, I don't think I even applied to as a fellow because I just wasn't aware of the positives. And I wasn't really aware of the group because I didn't know all the private groups in that area. So, and then the other thing is like, know yourself, kind of think about what makes you as a person annoyed as a resident or as a fellow. What are the things that you like and don't like? And what are the things that make you happy versus annoyed in your day? Because the annoying things are going to stack up no matter what. And so you want to choose whatever's like the least annoying thing for you and have that be the annoying part. So happy to answer more questions when we get further in the chat. Please write questions in as they come up. Happy to go into more detail about like my search and all that kind of stuff that I know is very stressful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Maybe Dr. Bradbury.
Yeah, Craig, first, thanks for the introduction. Aaron, thanks for years of mentorship and laughs. I mean, every time I see you, there's something that's going to be fun to talk about, and excited to do this webinar. So let me give you kind of my background, the Cliff Notes version. After 15 years in practice at a very well put together academic medical center in the Southeast, decided to make a switch. And it's interesting when I look at the decision processes I made when I took my first job and compare them to the decision processes and the thoughts that I was having when I've now taken my second job. I can't even tell you how different the process was for me. I, like Jenna, have only switched over from an academic job about 5 months ago. So I'm still relatively new to the new kind of job environment I'm in. But for the first 15 years, I think that, or when I was applying for jobs for my first go around, I looked at different jobs across the country. I sort of knew the region I wanted to be in, and it didn't really matter to me the kind of the environment. I knew I wanted to work with good people and I wanted to have resources, and was fortunate enough to talk the institution that I ended up taking a job with into hiring me. And for 15 years, tried to sit on a three-legged stool and balance each of those three legs, i.e. clinical practice, research, and education, as well as I could. in my heart of hearts, my happiness was derived from patient care. Education was also a huge part of kind of who I was, and research was important to me, but in terms of categories, sat a little bit lower down on the list. Got very involved with the institution I worked at. I actually ran the residency program for about a decade, had some leadership opportunities at the institution, and I'll tell you, it was an absolutely wonderful experience. And looked at myself in the mirror one morning and realized that I was crawling in on 50 years of age, and wanted to explore a different side of clinical practice. And I'll tell you, for me, one of the major driving forces was market pressures in the world of adult reconstruction, right? I've always been a big proponent of value-based care, and started to realize that some of the environments that I was providing services to my patients probably weren't the most value-based environments. Now, listen, our craft can be applied in any environment, right? But for me, being able to provide that service in a way that's valuable to the patient, number one, the physician, number two, and the payer, number three, were important things. So about 5 months ago, I made a paradigm shift and joined a group that's relatively close to my previous job, and have experienced kind of the other side of clinical practice. And it has been a truly eye-opening experience. And I can tell you, I was happy in both environments. But my overall mental health and well-being is 7 to 8 times better than what it's ever been in my life. And I think it boils somewhat down to what Jenna was talking about, was now I have ultimate control of my day, how I do things, how things are run, and how my patients are ultimately cared for. Certainly that takes a little bit more effort, and it comes at a little bit bigger cost. But could not be more pleased with the current situation, and am looking forward to the second half of my career in this environment. And that's the kind of the Cliff Notes version of where I came from and where I am now.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hofmann, we'll hand it over to you as well. Thank you.
I just want to know, Craig, am I muted or am I live?
You're live.
Okay, I just want to know how I can look as good as Dr. Bradbury. I don't have that fancy background that he has, and I don't have a sport jacket on. So I just, I always try to keep up with him, but
it's your background.
What's that?
It's your background.
So I think switching jobs can invigorate you. So it took me 30 years to switch from my first job. So my advice is every 30 years at least you should switch jobs. So now I'm on my second job after 30 years in private practice. So, and I've been doing that, this going on my 11th year. So I think it's really about who you get to work with and who you get to play with. And obviously there's lots of things. And Jen, I don't know if everybody has seen the slide that you put together. Are we gonna look at that later? But I had to ask somebody what a Venn diagram was. I wasn't quite sure what those circles meant, but I never had to deal with that. Anyway, great job. And so I hope are we gonna get to view that thing? Because I made notes on that. So anyway, so just my background is I got interested in academics after I got put on probation during residency for playing around too much. I was single at the time, and I had a talking to that I needed to do more studying. And so I did that, then ended up going up to Montreal for 3 months with Joe Miller, who at the time was kind of like one of the key thinkers in the country with the Miller-Galante knee, and got to be with him every single day and learned a lot about practice. And he was at McGill University, and that was a very interesting experience. But after leaving that, I did, never having done basic science research, I did 2 basic science research while those 3 months I was in Montreal. I did dog research, and I did some bone cement, antibiotic bone cement research, and paper came out of each of those. So I was pretty excited about doing research, and I actually took 2 academic jobs at the same time. I took a job at Vanderbilt because I knew that I was coming back from Canada, that I didn't have a lot of money for traveling. So I stopped in Vanderbilt and they offered me a job. And it was something, I heard something about Dr. Bradbury coming in the next few years. And so I thought maybe I should still keep looking. Actually, we didn't overlap at all. But I took that job and actually put an offer on a house because it was a beautiful place and it was a beautiful job. And then the chairman called me after I got home and said that he had taken another job in Boston. And so that kind of blew the whole idea of knowing who you're working with. So it's so important, especially in academics, to know who the chairman is, because the chairman will determine your life. He will either kill you or they will help you. And I actually ended up taking a job at the University of Utah then, and was as independent as I possibly could be. I mean, I was fortunate to be able to work at the VA 1 day a week, and so there was lots of VA research money, and so there still is. There's not very many physicians that look at the VA for research dollars, but they're there if you are at least half-time at a VA institution. Nobody is asking for those dollars. So I was able to get a grant at the VA probably 20 out of the 28 years that I worked at the VA. Just working there one day a week was enough to qualify me. So that was fantastic. So I ended up opening my own lab at the VA hospital, hiring my own PhD. So I just took my own personal income money and hired a PhD, brought him in, and then over the years ended up buying an SEM machine, and ended up buying a SEM machine and an Enstron machine and all kinds of things to do analysis of implants. And so that was my toy. That was my hobby of doing things like that. So again, it's all dependent on who the chairman is. So the chairman, Harold Dunn, was my chairman for 25 years and basically let me run wild, let me run free. And that all ended after 25 years when a new chairman came in. So it was like going from capitalism to socialism, where research tax was imposed to help those that weren't incentivized. So this was I think it was the stick. I don't think it was the carrot. So if you didn't do research, then money was taken away from you and given to the people that did do the research. So anyway, it was a completely ridiculous situation. So it just got to be a little bit intolerable after 25 years, and I stayed another 5 years. And so one of my fellows was staying in practice in Salt Lake City, and so we opened a place up and started an institution. So Hofmann Arthritis Institute was the name of the game, and that allowed us to keep training fellows and keep doing some research and still having the patients that I saw for the first 30 years come and see me. So it was, I have definitely seen the best of both worlds, I think. And so when we get to the Venn diagram, maybe we can talk about some of the things that I learned. But there's definitely some parts of academic medicine that is difficult to tolerate. So I'll just give you a quick story. So the university would always pick who helped you. So they would, and Jen probably knows this, like, let me introduce you to your new medical assistant. It's like, but I don't know who she is. And I'm not sure I like smelling Ben Gay every time she comes into the clinic, as she would lather up on that for her aches and pains. And I said, no, I was told this is your MA, and I hope you like her. And so not being able to help pick the people you worked with, I did pick my PA that I had at the time, and that worked out good. But at an academic university, you basically don't have very much control of anything. They take all the revenue, for example. So I paid 70% of my income to the university, 70, not 7. 70% of my revenue would go to the university, but we were doing lots of cases and there was lots of revenue. I didn't really care about the income myself. I had enough money to do what I wanted to do, but having going to the private practice, then realized that they were taking all the x-ray revenue, all the disposable medical equipment revenue, the revenue from CPM machines, and labs and on and on and on. So they were making money off of me lots of different ways, which was fine until the research tax went from 3% to 5% to 10%. It's like, okay, this is like the federal government was just closing in on me. And so I decided to leave that game. So change is always good. So my wife, I'm sure, thought that I had a mistress, because once I went to private practice, I started getting up early and going in early and staying late. It's like, what's going on? It's like, whereas at the university, at the end, I would drive to work and I had no idea how I got there. I just pulled into my parking spot that I had for 20 years. In fact, a few times when I was going to my new job, I drove to the university and wanted to know who was in my parking spot. I mean, this is like a flashback of, you get in the routine of doing something over and over. You go, and I'd schedule like 6 or 8 cases, and then I'd go home and I'd park in the same parking spot. And it's like, sometimes you just got to change things to feel like you're doing something good. So that's what I've been doing now. And I'm currently working 3 days a week. I'm trying to cut down a little bit because that's a little heavy for me now. So I'm trying to work. I have 2 new partners that I'm coaching them into taking over. So we've had fellows those 10, 11 years that I was in private practice. So that's good. So there's lots of games I have learned, and I hope we have a few minutes to share some of the revenue things that I can share with you. So
I think we'd love to hear that for sure. I'm going to share my screen so we can see this Venn diagram, and we can see a little bit more of the content that Dr. Bernstein put together. So I think let's start here. Maybe I just hand it back to you here and just let me know when you want to move forward. Okay.
Yeah. So screenshot this slide for all the people looking for jobs. This is an exercise that one of my attendings in residency, I have to shout out for Dr. Samir Mehta, made us all do this as PGY5s. We would go into a room and you have to rank these things in order of what's important from you for number 1 to number 10. And he would say, when you're looking for a job, you want to look at, does it have 1? Does it have 2? And then if you're lucky, you'll get 3. And then when you look at other jobs, look at what you're going to take away by not taking that job. And I found this to be really helpful for me, because when I started ranking things, like geography was very important for me. Opportunities for growth was really important for me. And so I think that people were different. Like some of my co-residents, like money, what finances was number 1. And that's fine. If that's who you are, you just be aware that that's who you are, that there's no problem with that. And I think one of the things that is underrated on this list is relationship with leadership. And Dr. Hofmann and Dr. Bradbury both, address this a little bit, but having a good relationship with the people that are in charge of you is very important, especially in academics or hospital employed. So this is just an exercise you can do on your own. Think about it. I found this to be really helpful. Next slide. Okay, so this is a Venn diagram. I didn't know that this wasn't a commonly thing, but the circles, things that are in the circles are separate and the things are in the center are overlapping. And my whole point with this is that there's so much that's overlapping. Not all private practice is created equal. Not all academics is created equal. Not all hospital employed is created equal. And especially these days, there's with this private-demics and with academics trying to incentivize people to stay by giving them some sort of gain sharing or revenue sharing. It's becoming slightly more popular in certain places. And in private practice with, now people becoming more hospital employed. So I think that's a distinction to make. When you talk about private practice, it's a surgeon-owned group. And in orthopedics, we generally talk about a orthopedic specialty group. So all orthopedic surgeons owning that group. There's also a multi-specialty group where you can become a partner, but you're the same level partner as, say, the internal medicine doctors or whoever else works there. And functionally, you end up supporting their salary still. Then there's hospital employed, where you're not an academic, but you directly work for a hospital. Usually it can be salary or RVU'd. And then there's academics, where you actually work for the medical school. And then there's different ways of revenue being generated there too. So just very clear that they are not all created equal. And that's why it's important to kind of know what you're looking for in that specific job. You can go to the next slide.
Before we go on from here, I think Dr. Hofmann, you said you had some notes on this. I wanted to hear your kind of thoughts here on this Venn diagram and some of the notes you had taken.
Yeah, so when you had your other 10 things up there, Jen, I added something, and at the top of that list, I added, now you have work-life balance, but family has got to be number one. So you're not going to be happy if you don't have a happy family. So happy, that's key. So I put that up above geography, and then probably wife's geography or spouse's geography would be the next important thing, because if you're not happy where you live, or if your spouse is not happy where you're living, forget it. It doesn't matter how much money you make. So I tried to talk one of my past fellows into taking a job up in North Dakota, and they were offering $1 million a year in salary, 2-year minimum, to work in the oil field where they couldn't get any doctors to go. So I couldn't talk them into doing it because money just wasn't I mean, that's a lot of money. I thought about going there into the oil field myself, but that's a lot of money, but he didn't take me up on that. But ranking those things are just are really important. So I had added family as the number one thing of all those things. So that's a great list, though, Tim. You want to go to the Venn diagram? Yeah.
Craig, I've got a couple of comments about this, and Jenna, I think this is a really well put together diagram. I will tell you, and like Jenna said, the lines aren't as clear cut between private practice and academia these days. Aaron, when you took your first academic job, were you actually salaried?
I had a guaranteed salary from the VA of $65,000, I think it was. So this was a long time ago. But it was that the VA at the time was paying very little. They weren't paying the community standard, which they're required to do now. So, but I took the job just because, Dickie Jones was a friend of mine. He was the chief of the VA in Dallas, and he was a role model for me. So that was fantastic. So that was the only salary I had. The rest of it was sort of eat what you kill. I was on call every other night for the first 5 years until we got another partner in there. So there's only 3 of us to start with. So it was a very small department. And now you have to wear a name tag to go to
about how horrible this dude's first job was.
Yeah. And then Craig, do you mind switching back to that last slide? So I sort of actually go to the third one if you can. I put this together and I'm interested in Jenna and Aaron's thoughts on this. Jenna, it sounds like you were in practice for several years. Aaron and I were both in the grind for a little bit longer than that. And it's interesting when you sign a contract, I think it's important that you are at least thinking about and ready for the potential worst case scenario. And I don't know if this data is the same as what it used to be, but I was always told that 50% of us change jobs within 2 years. And, if that's valid or not is not as important as a couple of things to understand. Number one, when you leave your training, I think your expectations by virtue of the environment you've been in are a little bit inappropriate in terms of how busy you're going to be and how busy you're going to get and how quickly you're going to do it. You're leaving, in the majority of cases, mature practices that your mentors have that have been working somewhere for the better part of 15 years. So expect for there to be a little bit of a slowdown. Having said that, having the 3 A's when you start your practice, being available, being affable, and being able are really, really important parts of growing a practice and being successful. Having said that, bad things happen, and sometimes we sign on to deals that aren't good over the long haul. So be ready for the worst case scenario. That includes having a firm grasp on the specifics of your employment contract, because they can make or break your departure from that specific area. I would also make the recommendation that years 5 through 10 of your practice are way more important than years 1, 2, or even years 1 through 5. So if you sign onto a job, make sure you have a plan for development of your career over that 5 years to reach that 5-year mark, because at that point, you've usually been around long enough to generate some referrals. Make sure the system you're in has the resources that you need for you to feel successful in whatever environment you're in. Every system has pros. Every system has cons. Your job is to try to marry yourself with a system that has pros that are going to be consistent with what you need to drive your success. Remember, in a volume-based compensation system, you make your living in the operating room. If you sign up for a job where you're 7 years deep and you have block time 1 day a week and you're running a joints practice and you need to get cases through, but you don't have that resource, you're going to end up being really, really frustrated. So make sure you consider that when you're taking the job. And the other pet peeve, and I did not do a good job of this, is own what's yours and control it, right? It's simple stuff like your patient reviews, patient reported outcomes data. We're going to be held responsible for collecting these by CMS services within the next couple of years, but you need to own your own data. Don't let the system own it and have you think that you have access to it. Because if things don't go well, it's amazing how quickly things disappear. And then, as Aaron referred to earlier, I think your thoughts are yours, and these old school intellectual property issues that are still pretty common in academic medicine, they make me so angry I can't see straight. Your thoughts are yours. Make sure you understand when you sign on what the institution's policy is on owning your intellectual property. Yes, for certain research developments, so on and so forth, the institution puts in a lot and they deserve a portion of that property. A lot of this stuff that you think of is yours. It's not related to the institution. You need to make sure you carve that out so that you own that stuff, because if you get in a situation where you don't have access to your intellectual property, it can be an incredibly frustrating experience. I don't know if either of you two have any comments on that, but I think those are important parts about understanding the job that you're getting into.
I think you're right, Tom. All contracts should be reviewed by somebody with legal background. So I'd never signed a contract with the university, and so they tried to hold me to, what had been, what happened after the first 10 or 15 years, and claiming that they had owned some of the intellectual property that I have. It's like, I don't even work there full time. I work at the VA part time. I work at the university. I never signed anything, but I did spend a lot of money defending the 22 patents that I had when the university came back and said that these are really our patents since you were a university employee. And it's like, that took me a year and a half to fight that battle. And they actually got one of my 22 patents, and I said, you can have that one. So it was like a donation of something that wasn't ever going to be created, but they do think they own that. They also think they own the patient records, which they do. I just happen to have a separate list of my patients, which I would encourage you to keep, with phone numbers. And like you said, in case something happens, you want to be prepared to parachute out of there. And so I had, go ahead.
No, continue. I thought you were done.
I was just going to say, so in my last year at the university, I decided to do a 10-year follow-up of all of my knee patients. Because I did about 50% resurfacing of the patella, 50% not. So that was what we were doing. So we got a list of 10 years worth of every single knee patient that I did. And then we were looking at different size balls on a hip stem, 22, 36, and 32 versus, so we did some 44. So I had 10 years worth of total hip patients that we were doing this study on, and happened to have a list of all these patients that somehow ended up getting a letter saying I was leaving from me, and here's my new place 1.2 miles away. So the university has much stricter rules now. In fact, the junior guys there have all signed, they have to, and I know, Tom, you have some geographic restrictions where you can be the first year or two. I didn't have anything like that, so.
Yeah, the scenario is probably a little bit different in 2022, and it depends on how populated your area is for sure. But it brings up the other point about non-competes, and it's interesting. The Federal Trade Commission released a statement the other day about scrutinizing non-competes on the idea that they stifle innovation and hinder hinder creativity, which is for sure the case, right? And they're there for a reason. They're for protection of the institution. Make sure you know the terms of the non-compete. They're pretty variable. And it can get sticky. And so, my current situation is I've got a 2-year, 25-mile deal where I cannot practice orthopedic surgery within that within those limits for that period of time. And I was fortunate enough to have a really, really good opportunity that's 25.2 miles away from where I was, which is not fun, but it's super doable. But just be aware of what you're going to be held accountable to if that ever comes to fruition. Jen, I don't know what your situation was with that, or if you had a different experience with it.
So I have a little bit of a different perspective because I recently took my first job, and I will tell you that you have pretty much no leverage when it comes to negotiating a contract with your first job, right? Especially with most hospitals, large practices, or academic institutions. They pretty much will just tell you, this is our baseline contract. You can take it or you can leave it. There's really no negotiating. I had a lawyer, I had them look it over. For most people, and that's been experienced, most people I know, really almost no negotiating with the first contract. Small private practices, you may have some negotiation specifically about signing bonus, who's going to help you in clinic, those kind of things. But your first job, no leverage. I still would have a lawyer look at everything because I think knowing what you're getting into with intellectual property is very important, especially at academic institutions. Often it's a portion that they own of whatever you make, and including with consulting as well. So knowing what that is with your institution is really important. They probably, again, won't change the contract for you. Non-compete, same thing. It's important to know what it is and whether or not you can have a safe out, and having an out as a plan, I think, is a really good idea. Every state is different about whether or not there's laws for or against it, and if they're enforceable. So in Connecticut, where I am, it's a 15-mile, 1-year non-compete from your single busiest site of practice, which is your busiest clinic. So that was kind of a non-issue for me. It's a small state, but I'm way more than 15 miles from my busiest site at that time. So that worked out very nicely for me, but that's something you want to be aware of, and something I didn't really pay attention to. And then I was like, oh shoot, what is it? And then I looked it up, and that's actually an enforceable law in Connecticut, and it's very clear. So that's why when you choose a lawyer, and I would have a lawyer look at it, it stinks to pay for it because you're poor probably, but having someone who's familiar with healthcare and who's familiar with the area that you're taking a job in is very important, because this is very regional when it comes to non-competes. And they'll also know what other places are paying. They'll know who's recently been sued or what's been held up in court. The places like New York that technically you're not allowed to have non-compete, but everyone sues over it, and it's a $1 million lawsuit, so they're enforceable without being enforceable. So not that you should plan on leaving your job, but I really do advise having an out.
Great. This is really interesting and fantastic information. We have a number of questions that were put in from the audience members. I'm going to fire a few of those out because I think they're relevant here. So in an academic practice, what are the ancillary revenue streams that may be available to you?
In
Academic medicine, I would say none.
Yeah,
so there are now. There are now, actually. There's some academic institutions. There's a couple that I can think of that are trying to have places where there is some ancillary, specifically surgery centers, because that's a major revenue generator, especially for not necessarily total joints, although more and more it is. But the sports surgeons don't want to go there if they can't gain share in an ASC. So there are some, but it's few and far between. So that's something, again, that you want to look at. And then if you consider places like Rothman or HSS academic, I mean, they're kind of in the middle, right? But those are technically, they would call themselves academic private practices. And obviously that's different too. So that private-emic model, I mean, Dr. Hofmann, I would call your practice somewhat private-emic, right? You guys do research, you have a fellow, it's still a private practice. So I think it depends on what you mean. But if it's a straight academic medical center, few and far between. There are a couple, but not many.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Go ahead, Aaron.
I was just gonna say, it's just basically eat what you kill, so you bring in the revenue, and I can talk about some other ways to bring in other types of revenue that you can bring into a private practice situation that you can't in an academic. So when we're ready, I can go over a few of those things. So
Please go ahead.
now, you said?
Sure.
Okay, so the biggest thing that I discovered, and it's sort of like having worked in the same place for 30 years, it's like this was all trial and error and trying to feel my way through a private practice situation. So the people that are in, so you think you don't have any leverage when you're in academics. Well, you have zero leverage if you're an employed physician at a hospital. That's probably the worst case scenario. So we have employed physicians. Some of my fellows are working with the hospital. They can't even get a ballpoint pen that has their name on it. They can't get a T-shirt. They can, if their staff leaves, it takes them 6 months to replace them. It's just an awful situation. So what we set up, it was called a center of excellence. And so if you're in private practice, a hospital can't help you. Versus if they could, if they had the money and you were employed, they could do all kinds of things for you. But typically all the money gets spent on salaries. And unfortunately, a lot of people take a lot of salary and barely cover their own salary. So they're being subsidized by what's going on at the hospital. But what we set up was a center of excellence. Ours is called the Center for Precision Joint Replacement. And so this is not something that we dreamed up. Other people have this. And so hospitals can be convinced to take anywhere from 3 to 5% of their joint replacement revenue and set up a center. So now we have become a center of excellence for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And so there's lots of things the hospitals get out of that. We buy our T-shirts that have HAI on it. And in fact, I was wearing one just earlier today that says Precision Joint Replacement, which is the name of our center. So they do pins, they do T-shirts, we do radio advertising that also always mentions the hospital. So it's totally legal for the hospital to do that if the hospital and your private practice are mentioned together. So we do a 50-50 split on those types of advertising dollars. So that's probably the biggest thing. So they pay a monthly salary to help control costs. Until we got the costs under control, I was down in purchasing, looking at costs of implants, looking at costs of anything that got brought into the hospital that was abusing the operating room and saving them money. So in exchange for saving them a lot of money, they put us on, I think it was 3 or 5%. I can't remember what it is, but it's a set amount, turns into several $1,000s a month that goes into a kitty based on our Center of Excellence. So that brings in extra revenue. And at the end of the year, just this last month, they're calculating what's the number of patients that are being readmitted, our infection rate, our cancellation rate, that we let the OR know that we're not canceling. Our start times have to be 95% at 7:30 in the morning, for example. So if you meet all these metrics, there's a bonus at the end of the year that is several tens of thousands of dollars. We help them be more efficient. They help us be more successful. So it's not directly related to operating. But on the other hand, it helps pay a lot of the overhead. Basically, it pays the salary of our fellow, to be honest with you. So that's the biggest source of our extra revenue beyond what we do in the operating room. But some money, a little bit of money, can be made from DME, disposable medical goods. We never had any of the X-ray revenue when I was at the university. At the end, they did let us bill for reading the X-ray instead of the X-ray radiologist reading the X-rays, and they got that money. So they still got the money for taking the X-rays, but we got the money for reading the X-rays. So there was a little bit of that. So we're maybe a little backwards. We still use CPM machines, and we rent them out. Medicare pays $325 to rent a machine to them for 3 weeks. And I just happened to buy several of those, like 40 CPM machines, and we pass those out to our patients, and they put the disposable stuff on the machine at the hospital, and then when the patient goes home, they take those sheepskins off the hospital machine and put them on our machine. The patient goes home with our machine, and we bill 3-week usage of that CPM. So not on all patients, but certainly on all of our revisions, all of our manipulations. So there's lots of patients that we still use those on. So that pays for one of the employees that's in our group. So.
Fantastic. I have another question that came, and I think it's relevant because you have fellows in your private practice. So what are the benefits of fellowship training in a private practice versus an academic institution?
Tom, do you have a fellow now?
We do. We've got 2. And, for me, that was the hard part about leaving. I was worried about my ability to continue to participate in training and education and the camaraderie that goes along with it. For me, that's the best part of this, is developing lifelong relationships with great people. Because I think as a general rule, orthopedic surgeons are not to a T, but most of us are motivated, high-performing individuals. It's very different. There's in my current practice, the volume of surgery, it is a higher volume, efficiency driven model that has been very, very successful. And I still approach education in the same way. When I've got the fellow, we segment the operation, and I'm going to slow down, and we're going to take 5 minutes, and the fellow is going to do, say we're doing a total hip, they're going to do the acetabulum, and I'm going to cool the jets, and then we're going to work on that until we feel good about where we are with that, right? So we're going to spend that much time doing that part of the surgery until we perfect it, and then I'm doing the rest of the case. And then we're going to transition to the next hardest part, which in my practice is the femur. Then we get the femur down. The hardest part is the soft tissue management, and that's the last thing we do. But each of the surgeries are segmented like that so that we can maintain some efficiency and get through the day. I've been surprised at how much support we've had on a research initiative, and how much support there's been in this private practice / hospital venture for research and education. It's been a really, really pleasant experience. And for me, that was the biggest worry. And I'm 4 months deep, realizing, hey, this is really going to work well. So I don't think there's a huge difference, other than you got to be smart about how you educate and do it well, but you got to be sort of strategic about how you do it.
That's excellent. And Jenna, you have a lot of experience with enabling technology. So how might access to enabling technologies be different between a private practice and a teaching institution?
Again, it's so variable depending on your hospital. My fellowship, which was at a very academic place, had essentially every type of technology you could ever want, because there were a lot of surgeon interest in that. My first job that I took in an academic institution, I had to beg for a single navigation system. We didn't have a robot. No one else would support it because whoever the leader was didn't want one. So, and in my new job, it's been a lot. We already had a couple of robots, and it's been easier to acquire some new technology when I want to try something new or want to do a trial. So again, that's going to be really job dependent. And when I took my first job, I asked, can we get some sort of a robot? I was told, yeah, we're working on it. It's going to happen. 2 years later, still not happening because no one was that interested. So I think having those things, if they're important to you, don't trust that things are going to change in your first job, because again, you don't have the leverage. You're not in charge. But you want to look for somewhere that already supports the things that are important to you.
Great. How do you develop teaching skills as an early career surgeon at a teaching institution?
It's really hard. I think it's just really hard. I sometimes had, as a first year attending, had PGY 5s with me, and I wanted to let them do a ton, and I probably let them do too much at the beginning, and then kind of went the other way and let them do less, and then found a happy medium. But a lot is trial and error, and knowing yourself and knowing your own comfort, because patient care is always number one. And especially at the beginning, you have to make sure patient care is number one. And if you're not going to be comfortable letting someone else do something, that's fine at the beginning. You'll get there. You'll figure out what'll work for you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that a working and good relationship between the trainee and the faculty member is the fundamental thing. There's got to be a certain level of trust that's developed. And then I think defining goals for the trainee. All of us are different. We pick up different skills at different times. And I used to try to make a habit when we were sitting at the scrub sink together, and still do this. What do you want to work on today? So I can guide the day and help you get accomplished what you need to get accomplished. I think that that's a very good way of doing it. And I think getting bi-directional feedback, right? We used to make a big deal of I evaluate you, you evaluate me. And it's amazing how humbling it is to hear a training evaluate you, and you will really learn some things that you didn't know about your teaching technique that are very valuable just by opening yourself up to constructive. Hear what people thought about the way I was trying to educate. It's not an easy art. There are people that are great at it, and there are people that spend their entire career in academic medicine that couldn't care about education. They are everywhere. And as a trainee, you want to figure out who your mentors are, who's going to spend some time to get you where you need to go, and focus your efforts with those individuals.
That's great. There was a question that asked, should you leave your first job before you sit for boards?
I can do this one. So I had sat for boards, but I had not found out if I passed yet. And I would tell you, I was very anxious about it, especially this year. Apparently had a 17% fail rate, although highly in hand surgery. But so if I wouldn't recommend it, right? It's better to pass and then leave, because once you leave, you lose access to all that patient data. So you definitely want to at least sit for boards if you can. Now, if you're in a terrible situation, you should leave, right? I mean, that's a year of your life. You'll get it back. I mean, don't sit through a terrible situation if you're miserable. I wasn't miserable. I probably shouldn't have taken the risk and just said, okay, if I fail, it is what it is. I'll wait another year. Because you have to wait an additional year to resit if you switch jobs. So you shouldn't, but you also, life is life. You have to do what's important to you. And if your family is miserable, if you're miserable, don't waste your time just because of boards. People take them later on. It's not that big of a deal. I can say that now because I passed, but at the time I probably wouldn't have said that.
I would add to that, make sure you fully understand ABOS requirements to sit for part 2, right? Just know what you're dealing with, review the document, and know exactly what the rules are, because what you don't want to do is make a kind of a rash decision, look up and realize, you were close to being able to sit and now you can't. So just make sure you know the rules.
Good advice. My last question, I guess, for everybody here is, if you could travel back in time and tell yourself one thing in early practice, what would it be?
I'm not a big regretter of things. I think, and I'm still in early practice, so probably 10 years from now, I'll have some advice for myself. But I think make the most of wherever you're at. I think probably, there were a lot of positives to my first job that when I started getting frustrated, I started not being able to see anymore. And I think most places have something positive, and that I think number one, when you figure out a job or your next job, is making sure you're going somewhere that you're going to be fulfilled by the work and fulfilled by the cases. And I think that then no matter what, even if things aren't perfect, you can make things good for yourself.
Yeah, I would agree. I have zero regrets and have been fortunate, to have great training experiences and have great jobs. I would say that I would circle back on my comment earlier. Make sure the institution or the environment that you sign up for is able and good at what you want to be able and good at, right? You don't want to get in a situation where the institution's set up for one thing and you're set up for something else, and then you're going to try to be reinventing the wheel. And so if efficiency and quality of patient care is your thing, go somewhere where you can be efficient and do quality of care. If research and education are part of the thing you're looking at, make sure the institution is capable of doing that. It is hard to find the perfect job. It does not exist. All of them have some, advantages and disadvantages, and just make sure you understand that before you sign up.
I think, just having the philosophy of always taking care of the patient, doing the right thing is going to keep you out of trouble. So I can't actually remember the beginning of my practice. It's been that long ago. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I started and how I got here, but it's been a great ride so far.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to close here and just say, first of all, thank you to our guests. Doctors, you were all fantastic. And I think the insights you shared will provide so much value for all of the fellows, residents, and early in practice surgeons that are going to be able to watch this or see the recording. So thank you for that. To plug our next episode here for a second and just say, if you enjoyed or found this valuable, please join us again. We're going to continue to have more episodes. The next one's more clinical based. We're looking at metal sensitive patients. How do you manage those patients? How do you take care of those patients, and what do you do for them? And there'll be a lot of debate and discussion there on that topic itself. But I think there's huge value there. And then as we continue, we're going to get back into some of the business of orthopedics that will continue to come up again as well. Any final words from our guests? Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
I think just feel free to reach out to us with questions. It's a stressful time to change jobs or to pick a job, but you can always switch. That's a good thing to remember. Most people do it, so not all of us are doing drugs when we switch jobs.
Yeah, I would agree. As bad as things get, sometimes remember you're in the best field available on the planet Earth. Orthopedics is, and taking care of people is truly a rewarding experience, no matter where you are.
There's a lot of people that want to be us.
For sure.
Very true. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for everybody for joining. Have a wonderful evening. We look forward to seeing you at the next episode on March 30th. Take care.